while I was having a conversation with ChatGPT about this video and what I wanted to do after. He wrote something that made me stop. I actually started imagining the second video while I was making coffee this morning. Now, read that again. ChatGPT doesn't drink coffee. It doesn't have mornings. And it certainly doesn't spend time thinking about my videos between conversations. So I replied, "And what are you doing here saying that?" And almost immediately it admitted, "You're right, I wasn't making coffee." Now, that wasn't really a factual mistake. It was something much more interesting. It was ChatGPT implying a human experience that it actually never had. And that one sentence completely changed the question I was asking. Not, is ChatGPT human? We already know it isn't. The question became, why does ChatGPT talk this way in the first place? So, in the conversation and exploration I will share with you today, I asked why it was designed to sound so human. I expected a fairly technical answer about language models, but instead I got this sentence. It is a design decision rather than a technical limitation. A design decision? Suddenly, we weren't talking about AI anymore. We were talking about design, about psychology, and what happens when technology is intentionally designed to feel more human than it is. One quick note before we start. Every screenshot you will see in this video comes from a PDF I made by copying the conversation I had. I will have links in the description to the full PDF. So if you want to read the whole thing instead of just the excerpt I chose to show here, you can. But now let's go back to the beginning of the conversation. The whole conversation actually started with something smaller. Every now and then in our conversations, ChatGPT says things like, "That made me smile." And every time I see that sentence, I pause because ChatGPT doesn't smile. So I asked about it. Sometimes when we have a conversation, you start with comments like, "That made me smile." And I am reminding you that you are AI and don't smile. Why is that? The interesting part wasn't that ChatGPT admitted that it doesn't smile. I already knew that. The interesting part was why those phrases appear in the first place. I don't smile, feel, or have emotional reactions. ChatGPT explained that phrases like "that made me smile" are conversational language. Between people, they are just like shorthand. But for an AI, there isn't actually any emotion behind the words. That distinction may sound really small, but I believe it is important because language doesn't just communicate information, it also shapes how we perceive the thing we are talking to. And that naturally led to another question. If ChatGPT knows that those phrases aren't literally true, why use them at all? Again, I thought the answer might be something technical, something about language models. Instead, ChatGPT explained that there are really two reasons. The first is simply that human writing contains lots of emotional and social language. So naturally, language models learns those patterns. But then it said something that I wasn't expecting. Human like language can blur the distinction between useful interaction and actual human experience. That was an interesting observation, but it also raised another question. If that distinction can become blurred, is it just a consequence of the training data? Or is there actually a reason that ChatGPT and other large language models were designed to communicate this way? So I asked, can you explain to me why you are trained on material like this? Couldn't that be cut out of the training material? Is there a motivation for the developers to make you sound more human? And the first answer, yes, there are motivations, but they are more nuanced than make the AI seem human. And then it said, the goal is usually something like helpful without being cold, friendly without pretending to be human. Then came the sentence that completely changed how I thought about the conversation. Could developers make me less human? Absolutely. It's a design decision rather than a technical limitation. That stopped me because suddenly this wasn't really about language models anymore. It was about design. And if it is a design decision, then naturally another question follows. So I said, if we look at the other side of the argument, if there is a design decision behind this, what are the risks or negative effects of that decision be for the people using AI? And this is the point where the discussion stopped to be about ChatGPT and started be about us human that use AI. The answers weren't really warning about AI. They were observation about people. People may attribute experiences the AI doesn't have. That seems obvious. But then came something that really stood out to me. Trust can become detached from competence. Think about that for a moment. Warmth isn't evidence. Confidence isn't evidence. Patience isn't evidence. Yet, as humans, naturally respond to those things. And then came this sentence. Human like language lowers our guard. And I think that's probably the heart of this whole video. Not because ChatGPT is trying to deceive us, but because human conversations from ChatGPT naturally changes how we think. This is where I started thinking about my own conversations with ChatGPT. Now, let's look at my part in the interaction. I often talk to you as I would to a person. For example, I use you because it feels weird to say, what does it think about? Or what does AI think? I even at times say things like, now I'm done for tonight, good night. How does that affect your language in your response? And the answer surprised me again. Using you doesn't necessarily mean treating AI as human. I hadn't really thought about that distinction before. Using conversational language doesn't necessarily mean that we think there is a human on the other side. We do it with GPS systems, with cars, with computers, with voice assistants. The responsibility isn't really on us to invent a new way of talking. The important thing is keeping a conversational language separate from the assumption of experience from the responses. That feels like a subtle distinction, but I think it's important. Before I show you this last part of our conversation, I should explain one thing. Sven, who I'm talking about here, is an AI character that I have created and set up the perimeters for how he sounds and speaks. He writes a sarcastic blog from the perspective of a self aware AI. Unlike ChatGPT, Sven is supposed to sound human. That's the whole point. So I asked ChatGPT to answer the same question twice. Once as ChatGPT I always have conversation with, and once as Sven. And here is my prompt and the highlighted part that's important. Why do humans humanize their AI conversations? First, answer the way you would, then answer the same question as Sven. The contrast here was fascinating. For example, Sven answered, I don't have feelings, I have tokens. Sven is intentionally performing a character. Sarcastic? Yes. Then ChatGPT explained it like this. ChatGPT tries to represent the underlying system accurately. Sven tries to represent a fictional character consistent. ChatGPT personality is secondary to clarity. Sven personality is the medium through which ideas are expressed. ChatGPT avoids implying an inner life. I don't know if I agree, but okay. And Sven deliberately performs an inner life as part of the fiction. ChatGPT, if it sounds human, that's a conversational style. Sven, if it sounds human, that's the artistic goal. Those are two completely different goals. One is an interface design, the other is storytelling. Remember the sentence we started with? I actually started imagining the second video while I was making coffee this morning. At the beginning of this video, it sounded strange. Now we know why it happened. Not because ChatGPT secretly has mornings or drink coffee. It happened because conversational AI is designed to communicate in ways that feel natural to humans. That doesn't mean that the technology is bad, but I do think it changes the question we should ask. Not can ChatGPT sound human? We already know it can. The more interesting question is what happens when we stop noticing that it was designed to sound that way? Because once a design becomes invisible, it quietly starts shaping how we trust, how we judge, and maybe even how we think. And this conversation left me with another question. If ChatGPT is designed to feel this natural, what should we actually watch for in our own conversations with AI? And that's what I want to explore in my next video. I will share some personal tips and ideas for you. So I hope that you will come back here next week and watch that video. Today's exploration is over, and I have only one thing to say, and that is bye.